Okay, so moving on to Act 4. At the end of Act 3, we have, of course, Macbeth, who's kind of been led away by Lady Macbeth after this disturbing hallucination that he's had during this banquet of Banquo, his former ally and comrade, the corpse in front of him. And as discussed between Hecate and the three witches, Macbeth does as they suspect. He comes to see the witches again. He's essentially looking for more guidance and he wants more support about what's happening. And he goes to the witches asking for further guidance, and they give him 3 apparitions. And each apparition performs a different function. The first is a head that has a helmet on it, and it basically says, "Beware Macduff." And he kind of takes note of this and says, "What else?" And the next one is a bloody child, and the bloody child says, "No man born of a woman can harm Macbeth." So again, he takes note of that. And then the third apparition is of, it's a boy with a crown carrying like a tree or a branch from a tree. And it says, "No one will harm Macbeth until Birnam Wood comes to Dunsinane." Now Dunsinane is his castle, and Birnam Wood is basically kind of a large forest that's nearby. And he kind of thinks, well, that means that's not going to happen. Of course, a forest can't move and can't come to my castle. So these 3 apparitions, they perform different functions. Beware Macduff, it gives him a bit of a kind of a heads up as to who's going to be his next challenge. The "no man born of a woman can harm Macbeth," well, that makes him believe that he's somewhat invincible, because obviously in his mind and in most people's mind, well, every person, every human is born of a woman. It's natural. So he perceives that to be a suggestion that he's almost immortal. And then the last one, as we've already mentioned, is this idea that, well, of course I won't be harmed because Birnam Wood won't come to the castle. It's fixed in the ground and it cannot move. So he's kind of reassured by these apparitions because each of them give him a suggestion that he will be in control and that he can't be harmed. Now, word reaches Macbeth that Macduff has fled to England and that Macduff is trying to raise an army to basically fight back against him. Macbeth is enraged by this and he decides there privately that he's going to kill Macduff, kill all of his family, and make sure that his bloodline can't continue. Because throughout this entire play there is a fear of bloodlines, that, you know, if the person who is his main target can be killed, their sons and daughters need to be killed as well, because obviously the bloodline needs to be discontinued. Lady Macduff and her son are murdered while Macduff himself is in England, and Macduff is in England to speak to Malcolm, to try and ask Malcolm to raise an army to come back to fight against the tyrant that they're calling Macbeth. Now, he eventually kind of persuades Malcolm, and Malcolm says that he and an English nobleman called Seward will have 10,000 men that they're going to return to Scotland with to fight Macbeth. During this kind of discussion, Ross arrives from Scotland with a message for Macduff, and the message is that his family have been killed by Macbeth. Now, Malcolm is there at that point, and he can kind of console Macduff, and he basically says to him, "The revenge that we will enact together will give you some sort of medicine against this grief that you're experiencing." So Malcolm and Macduff are aligned there, and they both decide to come back to Scotland together and to fight against Macbeth and enact revenge on what he's done to Macduff's family. That's the end of the act. 2 key quotes that I would suggest for this particular act. The first one comes from scene 1, and it's basically just one of the key apparitions, and it's, "None of women born shall harm Macbeth." Now, it's a really easy quote to remember because it's just straightforward, there's no difficult language there, but it ties directly into themes like, you know, the supernatural because it's said by the witches, it's about prophecy, it's about fate. It's also to do with the idea of manipulation because Macbeth believes this to mean that he's completely immortal. And then the second quote I would suggest is the quote that's actually said by Malcolm in scene 3 in a way to try and console Macduff when he's told that his family have been murdered. The quotation is, "Make us medicines of our great revenge to cure this deadly grief." So the medicine to cure their deadly grief is the revenge that they can enact together on the tyrant Macbeth. So they kind of, it's almost a quotation that suggests solidarity and unity and opposition against this tyrant of Macbeth. It's also the beginning of the end for Macbeth, really, because these 2 key characters have decided to raise an army together. and to try and restore the natural order of things, which is have the son of Duncan, Malcolm, return to the throne. Those are the key ideas for Act 4. We're moving on to our final act in our next video, which is Act 5, and the play will come to its conclusion there. Thanks.